Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take those dense reports, pull out the core knowledge, and give you the insight you need. Today, we are digging into something pretty surprising in the tech world. A massive reported deal
Well,
between Apple and Google, of all companies. And it's set to completely change Siri.
It really is a headline grabber, isn't it? These two giants, usually at odds.
Exactly. Fierce competitors, right? Cross OS, search, hardware, everything. So the fact that Apple is apparently paying Google is big news in itself. But it's more than just that. It's the reported price, staggering, and maybe even more telling, the huge technical gap that seems to be forcing Apple's hand here.
It really shows how fast AI is rewriting the playbook. I mean, when you see companies like this, usually so protective of their own tech, striking a deal this big financially and technically, it tells you the tech they're after isn't just nice to have anymore. It's existential.
So our mission today is to walk you through the details of this reported billion-dollar handshake. We want to understand the tech gap driving it and figure out what this means for Apple's whole build-it-ourselves philosophy.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating window into the real costs and complexities of staying competitive in AI right now.
Okay, so let's kick off where the sources do, which is, well, the money. Bloomberg's reporting Apple is nearing this agreement.
That's the core report, yes. Sources close to the situation are detailing this arrangement where Apple is apparently set to pay Google roughly $1 billion per year.
$1 billion
Yeah.
annually. Just let that sink in. I mean, Apple has tons of cash, obviously, but still, $1 billion a year to a competitor.
And critically, it's not for some minor feature. This reported payment is specifically for access to a highly customized version of Google's main AI model, Gemini.
Right, the powerhouse AI.
Exactly. And that custom Gemini is intended to be the engine driving this huge overhaul we're expecting for Siri.
That figure, $1 billion a year, it's not for ads, not for parts, it's for pure intelligence. What does that say about how much these top-tier AI models are actually worth right now?
Well, it's fascinating because it signals a real escalation. We've seen other big AI deals, but maybe not quite like this for just integration. For context, you could look at the deal between Snap and the AI company Perplexity earlier this year. Snap reportedly paid around $400 million just to integrate Perplexity's search tech.
Okay, $400 million, that already sounds like a lot.
It was considered a really high benchmark at the time. It showed that getting advanced AI integrated was costing hundreds of millions. But this Apple-Google deal, if the billion-dollar-a-year figure is accurate, doesn't just top that $400 million. It completely dwarfs it. It kind of resets the bar for what foundational AI access costs if you haven't built it yourself.
Wow. So the price tag itself is a story about industry priorities. Okay, we get the financial shock. But that $1 billion makes you ask the big question, why? Why does Apple, the company famous for innovation, need Google's help for this? Which brings us to that technical gap we mentioned.
Yeah, the sources basically frame it as a, let's say, necessary temporary measure. The reporting suggests Apple's own internal AI, what they call Apple Intelligence, isn't quite powerful enough yet to handle some of the really advanced features they want to roll out for Siri.
Features needing more complex thinking beyond just basic commands.
Exactly. Things that likely require real-time, sophisticated reasoning, and their current stuff might not be there.
Okay, and this is where we get to the technical heart of it, the aha moment, measured by something called parameters. Can you break that down? Because that seems to be the key metric here.
Right. Parameters, you can think of them as the knobs and dials inside the AI model. They hold the learned knowledge, the patterns, the complexity. More parameters generally means the model can understand more nuance, handle trickier tasks, connect more dots,
So more parameters equals more brain power, essentially.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And the custom Gemini model, Apple is reportedly licensing access to. The reports say it has about 1.2 trillion parameters.
1.2
Yeah.
trillion.
Yeah.
Okay, that number's almost hard to visualize. How does that stack up against what Apple has built itself?
Well, this is where the gap becomes really clear. Apple's current cloud-based components of Apple Intelligence, they operate with around 150 billion parameters.
Okay, hold on. 150 billion versus 1.2 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just do the simple math, Google's model is roughly 8 times more complex parameter-wise than what Apple has ready for these kinds of cloud tasks today.
Exactly. 8 times. That kind of difference, it's a significant leap. It really highlights the scale of capability they're trying to bridge, and bridge quickly.
But I want to push on that 8x a bit. You mentioned Apple Intelligence is big on doing stuff on the device for privacy. Parameter count isn't everything, right? Couldn't Apple just optimize its smaller model better? Why the absolute need for this massive, cloud-based 1.2 trillion monster?
That's a really important point. Optimization is absolutely crucial, especially for those on-device tasks. The quick things, personal context, stuff you want kept private on your phone. Apple's great at that. But
Yeah.
when you start talking about the kind of tasks the new Siri is supposedly aiming for, like synthesizing information from live search results, reasoning across different apps, maybe generating really complex text or code on the fly, that's where sheer scale starts to matter a lot more.
Right.
A model with 1.2 trillion parameters has just learned so many more patterns from vast amounts of data. It can handle those really ambiguous, complex, long-tail requests that a smaller model, even a highly optimized one, might just struggle with or fail to answer reliably. They're essentially buying access to that massive computational power needed for the really heavy lifting, often cloud-dependent AI tasks.
So it's like, for the private on-device stuff, we use our efficient 150 billion model. But for the big, broad, general intelligence tasks, we need to rent Google's giant AI engine, Gemini.
That seems to be the calculation, yes. It frames why they'd be willing to pay such a premium, that $1 billion, to get that capability now, rather than wait potentially years to build it to that scale themselves.
Okay, that makes the technical need much clearer. So let's shift gears. We understand the why from a tech perspective. Now, what about the strategy, the philosophy? This leads us to Section 3, strategic implications. Apple's whole brand is built on controlling the experience end to end, the chip, the OS, the software. Using a competitor's core AI for Siri feels like a massive departure.
It really is. It's a fundamental shift from their standard playbook. For decades, their edge has come from that tight integration, owning the core technology, relying on Google, who they compete fiercely with in search, in mobile OS for the actual intelligence powering Siri.
Yeah.
That definitely challenges that carefully crafted identity.
And doesn't it immediately create some tension? With their big push on user privacy, how do they square integrating a giant Google AI model, likely cloud-based for the heavy stuff, with that privacy-first message they use for Apple Intelligence?
That is the absolute core conflict here, you're right. Now, Apple would certainly build in strong safeguards. The fact that it's a custom Gemini model likely means strict data siloing and controls.
They'd have to.
They absolutely would. But fundamentally, some data processing for those complex queries will likely rely on infrastructure built and run by their biggest rival. They seem to be making a strategic bet, prioritizing getting that advanced capability now, even if it means navigating some tricky privacy perceptions and potential data flow issues they'd normally avoid, like the plague. They're banking on the technical safeguards being robust enough to keep user trust. It's a high-wire act.
And this wasn't a snap decision, apparently. The sources suggest Apple did its homework, looked at the market before landing on Google.
That's right. The reporting indicates they considered and even tested models from other big players, specifically OpenAI and Anthropic, earlier in the year.
Okay, so they shopped around.
Exactly. It wasn't like Google was the only option. This suggests they went through a pretty rigorous evaluation. Gemini must have come out on top for some reason, maybe sheer capability, maybe cost effectiveness for what they needed, or perhaps it was just the best technical fit for the kind of customization and deep integration Apple requires.
So after checking out the competition, they still ended up partnering with Google. This brings up a really crucial question, especially for you listening, thinking about the long game here. The deal is framed as temporary, right, just to bridge the gap. But what are the real risks for Apple in becoming reliant on Google for this core intelligence, even if it's meant to be short-term? We know in tech, sometimes temporary sticks around.
That's the million-dollar, or rather billion-dollar question, isn't it? The short-term win is obvious. They get competitive AI features much faster. The risk, though, is exactly what you said: dependency, inertia. Once you deeply integrate a system as complex as a 1.2 trillion parameter model across millions of devices, and maybe developers start leveraging its specific capabilities.
It gets harder and harder to pull it out.
Precisely. Extracting that later, cutting off that billion-dollar payment and switching back to a purely in-house solution could become incredibly difficult technically and maybe even financially. They might inadvertently paint themselves into a corner. The temporary fix could become quasi-permanent infrastructure.
So they're trading some strategic control, some of that Apple way, for speed in this incredibly fast-moving AI race. A calculated gamble.
Seems like it.
Okay, let's wrap things up with Section 4. Timeline and outlook. When might we actually see this smarter, potentially 8 times more complex Siri in action?
The reports suggest the target launch for this overhauled Siri is next spring. That timing likely lines up with their next major OS release cycle, maybe iOS 19 or whatever they call it.
Next spring. Okay, but given this involves integrating tech across two giant rival companies,
hmm
it feels fair to add a note of caution, right? Plans could slip.
Oh, absolutely. Integrating a custom external AI model of this magnitude while trying to maintain Apple's rigorous security and privacy standards, that's not a simple flick of a switch. There are huge technical hurdles, coordination challenges. So yeah, while spring is the target, delays wouldn't be shocking. It's a complex undertaking.
So for you, listening to this deep dive, hopefully you now have a clearer picture of this major AI deal. You understand the kind of money involved, that potential billion-dollar annual price tag. You grasp the technical reason behind it, that huge 8x jump in parameter complexity Apple seems to need. And you see the strategic tightrope they're walking, balancing immediate needs against their long-term philosophy of independence.
It really underscores how crucial this foundational AI infrastructure is becoming. It's defining the next wave, and the fact these rivals are partnering up shows just how high the stakes are to simply stay relevant.
Which brings us neatly to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. The whole premise here is that this Google deal is just temporary, a bridge until Apple's own AI catches up. But what really happens when Apple decides, okay, time's up, we're switching back? What power or leverage might Google have gained during that period of dependency, however long it lasts?
Yeah, think about that. Even if it's temporary, Google's AI is potentially embedded at the core intelligence layer of hundreds of millions of the world's most valuable devices for a year, maybe more. What insights about usage patterns, query types, scaling challenges does Google inevitably gain, even with strict data controls? Could that knowledge itself become a lasting strategic advantage for them long after the formal contract ends?
Something to definitely think about as we wait for that potential spring launch. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
Until next time.